The ivory silk of my gown cascaded behind me like a stream of moonlight as I walked down the seemingly endless aisle. Each step echoed beneath the vaulted ceilings of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow-hued patches on the marble floor, shards of light that seemed to dance and shimmer with every beat of my heart. The melody of the organ swelled around me, but I could only hear the rush of blood in my ears as I fixed my gaze on Sebastian. He waited at the altar, a figure carved from a Renaissance dream. His dark hair caught the light, and his emerald eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. The charcoal gray of his tuxedo was a perfect contrast to the white roses and baby's breath that adorned every pew, every pillar, every surface of this perfect moment I had fantasized about since I was a little girl. "You look breathtaking, my father," William whispered beside me, his voice thick with emotion as he squeezed my arm. I felt tears welling up, threatening to ruin my carefully applied mascara, but I blinked them back. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The culmination of 3 years, with the man who had swept me off my feet at that charity gala in Manhattan, who had proposed under the stars on a beach in the Hamptons where Wed shared our first kiss, who had promised me forever with such conviction that I never once doubted a single word. The guests rose as we passed. Their faces beamed, handkerchiefs already dabbing at the first tears, and the flashes of cameras went off like captured lightning. I saw my mother, Laura, in the front row, her hands clasped over her heart, pride radiating from every line on her face. Behind her sat Sebastian's mother, Eleanor, her lips curved into what was meant to be a smile, but on her sharp features, it seemed cold. Something flickered in her dark eyes as our gazes met, something I couldn't identify, but it sent an unexpected shiver down my spine despite the warmth of the cathedral. "Don't be ridiculous," I chided myself. "It's just nerves, wedding day jitters. Everything is perfect." But as I continued toward Sebastian, my eyes fell on Chloe, standing among the bridesmaids. Her platinum blonde hair gleamed in the cathedral light. My best friend from college, the woman who helped me pick this very dress, who organized my bachelorette party, who had been there for every moment of doubt and every wave of joy during our engagement, should have been radiant. But there was something off about her expression, a tension around her blue eyes, a strain in her smile that made my stomach knot with a vague unease. "Enough," I commanded my racing thoughts. "This is your wedding. Focus on Sebastian. Focus on love. Focus on forever." My father placed my hand in Sebastian's, and the familiar warmth of his touch steadied me. His fingers were strong, confident, yet I could have sworn I felt a slight tremor as they closed around mine. When I glanced up at his face for reassurance, I saw his gaze flicker briefly toward the crowd before settling back on me. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice echoing in the hushed cathedral, "we are gathered here today to witness the holy union of Sebastian Ashworth and Isla Miller." The ceremony unfolded like a fairy tale. Sebastian's vows were pure poetry, words of soulmates and destiny, and a love that would transcend time. My own voice trembled as I promised to love him in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, till death do us part. The weight of those words settled around us like a benediction. And when he slipped the platinum band onto my finger, I felt complete in a way I'd never imagined. "You may now kiss the bride." Sebastian's lips found mine, soft and warm and perfect, and the cathedral erupted in applause and cheers of joy. A shower of rice and rose petals rained down on us as we practically floated back down the aisle, my hand secure in his, my heart soaring with the absolute certainty that I was the luckiest woman alive. The reception at the family estate was a whirlwind of dancing and laughter, of champagne toasts and heartfelt speeches. Sebastian spun me around the dance floor to our song, "At Last," by Etta James, as our friends and family looked on with beaming faces. Every detail was flawless, from the cascades of white orchids adorning each table to the 7-tiered cake that looked like a museum piece. Yet as the night wore on, I began to notice little things, small thorns pricking at my euphoria. Sebastian's smile seemed strained during the father-daughter dance, and he kept glancing at his watch when he thought no one was looking. When my eyes met Chloe's during the bouquet toss, which, despite being single, she made no effort to catch, she quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne. Most unsettling was Eleanor, Sebastian's mother, who spent most of the evening in hushed, urgent whispers with relatives I didn't recognize, her dark eyes occasionally flicking toward Sebastian and me with something that looked almost like pity. The thought was so absurd I dismissed it immediately, but it left a cold spot in my chest that not even Sebastian's kisses could warm. "Ready to get out of here, Mrs. Ashworth?" Sebastian murmured in my ear as the reception wound down, his breath sending a pleasant shiver down my neck. The sound of my new name on his lips should have thrilled me, but there was a hurried quality to his tone that made me pull back to study his face. "Is everything okay?" I asked, noticing the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting toward the exit. "Of course," he said, but his laugh sounded hollow. "Just can't wait for our honeymoon. That's all." We said our goodbyes in a blur of hugs and well wishes, rice and sparklers lighting our path to the waiting limousine. Sebastian's ancestral estate, now our home, awaited us in the Hudson Valley, just outside the city, an imposing mansion that had been in his family for generations. It was where we would spend our wedding night before flying to the Amalfi Coast the next morning to begin the rest of our lives. The house loomed against the starry sky as we drove up the winding driveway, its Gothic windows gleaming like watchful eyes in the moonlight. Ivy crept up the stone walls, and 100-year-old oaks cast gnarled shadows across the manicured grounds. It was beautiful, in an ancient, evocative way, but tonight it felt more menacing than romantic. Sebastian was quiet during the drive, his hand resting on my knee but his attention somewhere beyond the window. When I tried to make small talk about the ceremony, about how perfect everything had been, his answers were distracted, monosyllabic. "The guest room in the east wing has been prepared for your mother," he said suddenly, breaking a long silence. He blinked, confused. "My mom went home with Dad. Remember? They aren't staying the night." Sebastian's face tightened for a fraction of a second. Then he shook his head with a forced laugh. "Right, of course. Sorry. I'm just exhausted. It's been a long day," but his explanation did nothing to soothe the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. This wasn't Sebastian. He was usually so attentive, so focused on me, especially during important moments. On this, the most important night of our lives together, he seemed like a stranger occupying my husband's body. The limo pulled to a stop before the grand entrance, and the chauffeur came around to open our doors. Sebastian helped me out, his grip firm but impersonal, more polite than passionate. The train of my dress whispered against the stone steps as we walked toward the massive oak doors, their brass knockers gleaming in the porch light. Inside, the house was dimly lit. Shadows pooled in the corners and danced along the walls, which were lined with portraits of Sebastian's ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to follow us as Sebastian led me toward the main staircase, his footsteps echoing in the marble foyer. "I had Stella prepare the master suite," he said, his voice sounding oddly formal. "Everything should be ready for tonight." The way he said those last words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the drafty old house. This was not how I had imagined the start of our wedding night. Where was the romance, the passion, the overwhelming joy of two people finally united? We walked up the stairs in silence, my dress trailing behind me like a ghostly echo of the day's festivities. The master suite was at the end of a long, portrait-lined hall, and when Sebastian pushed open the heavy door, my breath caught at the beauty that greeted me. Rose petals covered the king-sized bed in intricate patterns. Candles flickered on every surface, casting a dancing light on the silk curtains and antique furniture. A bottle of champagne was chilling in an ice bucket next to two crystal flutes, and the scent of jasmine and vanilla hung in the air from dozens of white roses arranged throughout the room. "It's beautiful," I whispered, some of my earlier tension melting away. This was more like the Sebastian I knew, the romantic, the planner, the one who paid attention to every detail. But when I turned to share the moment with him, to lose myself in his arms and finally reclaim the passion that had been building between us all day, I found him scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Sebastian," I said softly. He looked up quickly, pocketing the phone. "Sorry, just work. You know how it is. On our wedding night?" The words came out sharper than I intended, and I saw him flinch slightly. "It's nothing urgent," he said, but he was already heading for the door. "I just need to make a quick call. A problem with the hotel booking in Italy. I'll be right back. I promise." Before I could protest, before I could ask why it couldn't wait until morning, he was gone, leaving me alone in the candlelit room with nothing but the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. I stood there for a long moment, the silence pressing in on me like a physical weight. The rose petals that had seemed so romantic just moments before now looked like scattered fragments of a dream that was already starting to fray. The candles flickered, casting shifting shadows that made the room feel alive, watchful. "He'll be back," I told myself firmly. "It's just nerves. Last-minute jitters. Perfectly normal." But as the minutes ticked by, stretching into an hour, my reasoning began to feel as fragile as tissue paper in the rain. I tried his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent texts that went unanswered. The champagne sat untouched, its bubbles slowly dying in the crystal flutes. I slipped out of my wedding dress and into the silk nightgown I'd chosen for this night ivory lace with tiny pearl buttons that caught the candlelight like captured stars. I brushed out my hair until it fell in waves over my shoulders. I put on the perfume Sebastian loved, and I waited, and waited. The house settled around me with creaks and sighs that sounded almost like whispers in the darkness beyond the windows. A distant clock chimed 11, then 1/2 past. The candles burned low, wax pooling on the antique furniture, and still Sebastian did not return. By the time the grandfather clock in the foyer struck midnight with deep, resonant chimes, I was pacing the room like a caged animal, my silk slippers soundless on the Persian rug. Annoyance had given way to hurt, and fear was beginning to creep in at the edges of both. Where could he be? What could possibly be so important that he would leave his new bride on their wedding night? And then, cutting through the silence that followed the final chime, I heard it. A sound that made the blood freeze in my veins, my heart skipping several beats before resuming at a frantic pace. It came from deep within the house, a low, rhythmic, creaking sound that felt almost intimate, like bed springs. The thought was so horrific, so impossible, that I immediately dismissed it. "You're being paranoid. It's an old house. Old houses make noises." But when I pressed my ear to the door, the sound continued, now accompanied by what might have been muffled voices or moans. My hand trembled as I turned the ornate brass knob, pulling the door open just enough to slip out into the hall. The corridor stretched before me like a tunnel, lit only by sconces that cast pools of yellow light between long stretches of shadow. The sounds were clearer now, coming from the direction of the east wing where the guest rooms were. Each step was like wading through quicksand, my bare feet silent on the runner that covered the hardwood floors. The portraits of Sebastian's ancestors watched me, their painted eyes seeming to hold 1,000 secrets. More than once I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing but shadows and stillness. The sounds grew louder as I neared the east wing, and with them came the unmistakable noise of voices whispered but urgent, intimate in a way that made me feel sick. "This is impossible. Sebastian loves me. We just got married. He promised me forever only hours ago." But even as my mind raced with denials, my body knew the truth. Every instinct was screaming of danger, of betrayal, of a profound, heart-shattering wrongness that was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the man I had just pledged my life to. I stopped before the door from which the sounds were emanating most clearly. Eleanor's suite, the one she occupied whenever she came to visit. Light spilled from beneath the door, warm and golden, and the voices inside were clearer now, though still muffled by the heavy wood. A woman's laugh, low and breathless. A man's voice, deep and familiar, murmuring something that made the woman sigh. The sound of sudden, passionate movement. My hand hovered over the doorknob for what felt like an eternity. Every rational thought warred with the rising certainty that opening that door would destroy everything. My marriage, my trust, my heart, my sense of reality. But I had to know. Even if the knowledge killed me, I had to know. The brass was cold beneath my palm as I turned it slowly, praying it wouldn't creak, praying I was wrong, praying that whatever I found beyond this threshold was not the end of everything beautiful I had ever believed in. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a scene that would be forever burned into my memory. Candles flickered throughout Eleanor's suite, casting a dancing light on the antique furniture and Persian rugs. But it was the bed that commanded my attention. A massive four-poster bed, upon which two figures moved together in a passionate embrace, their bodies entwined, their voices rising in sounds of pleasure that felt like daggers in my chest. At first, all I could see were shapes and curves, pale limbs in the candlelight. The woman's hair was splayed across the pillows like spilled gold, and the man's broad shoulders blocked most of the view as he moved above her. But then he shifted, and the profile that came into view in the flickering light made the world tilt on its axis. My husband, the man who had promised to love only me just hours before, was making love to another woman in his mother's bed, his wedding ring glinting in the candlelight as his hands roamed her body with familiar intimacy. The woman beneath him arched her back, her face turning toward the door, and when I saw who it was, the last fragments of my world crumbled to dust. Chloe, my best friend, my maid of honor, the woman who had helped me choose my wedding dress, who had held my hand through every pre-wedding anxiety, who had told me just this morning how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful man. They moved together with the rhythm of lovers who had done this many times before, their whispers tender, their sighs passionate, a symphony of betrayal that echoed in my shattered soul. "I've missed this," Chloe gasped, her fingers tracing a path down Sebastian's back. "I hated watching you with her today." "It had to be done," Sebastian replied, his voice thick with lust. "But it's over now. She'll never suspect a thing. We can finally be together, just like we always planned." The words hit me like physical blows, each one stealing a piece of my breath until I felt dizzy from lack of oxygen. Always planned. How long had this been going on? How long had I been living a lie? What if she finds out? Chloe's voice had a note of concern that might have been touching if it wasn't about betraying me. "She won't," Sebastian said with cruel confidence. "Isla is too trusting, too naive. She sees what she wants to see. Besides, after tonight we'll have access to her trust fund. We can disappear anywhere in the world." The trust fund, the inheritance from my grandmother that I had, just last week, signed over into Sebastian's control as part of our premarital financial planning. The inheritance I had entrusted to him because I loved him, because I believed he would always have my best interests at heart. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't process it. This wasn't a moment of weakness, a one-time mistake born of doubt or confusion. This was a deliberate, planned deception, orchestrated before I even knew Sebastian existed. I must have made some sound, a gasp, a sob, some involuntary expression of devastation because both figures in the bed froze. Sebastian's head whipped toward the door, and in the candlelight, I saw his expression shift from passion to shock, and then to something that might have been guilt had he been capable of such an emotion. Isla. My name was a curse on his lips. Chloe scrambled to cover herself with a sheet, her face flushed with more than just passion, shame, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. "I can explain," Sebastian started, but his voice was hollow, automated, like a recording of words he never expected to have to use. "Explain?" The word came out as a whisper, but it seemed to echo in the sudden silence that filled the room. "Explain what?" I stepped into the room, my silk nightgown rustling in the thick air that smelled of sex and betrayal and the death of innocence. They both watched me with the wary attention of predators caught with their prey. "Explain how my husband is in bed with my best friend on our wedding night?" My voice was rising now, fueled by an anger so pure it felt almost holy. "Explain how this was all a plan, how you're both stealing my money, how my entire marriage is a lie." "It's not what you think," Chloe said, her voice small and pathetic. I laughed, and the sound was so bitter it made me flinch. "Not what I think? You are naked, in bed with my husband, talking about your plans to rob me blind. And it's not what I think?" Sebastian swung his legs over the side of the bed, fumbling for his clothes. "Isla, please, just let me explain. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I was screaming now, all pretense of control gone. "What's complicated about betrayal? What's complicated about lies? What's complicated about ruining someone's life for money? You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." The words exploded out of me with years of pent-up emotion. "You never loved me. This entire thing, our whole relationship, was for my inheritance. Was any of it real?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Sebastian's face had gone pale, but there was no remorse in it, no sorrow for the pain he had caused, just calculation. The gears were turning as he tried to figure out how to mitigate the damage to his carefully laid plans. Isla, if you would just calm down and listen. Calm down? I felt something inside me snap, the last thread holding my sanity together. You want me to calm down? I trusted you with everything. My heart, my body, my future, my money. I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me? Chloe had been silent during this exchange, clutching the sheet to her chest, but now she spoke with the kind of entitled indignation only the truly selfish can muster. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen, she said. You weren't supposed to find out. Oh well, that makes it all better. I rounded on her, this woman who had smiled at my wedding just hours before, who had hugged me and told me how happy she was for me. How long? How long has this been going on? She looked at Sebastian, searching for a cue, for permission, perhaps just hoping he would answer for her. But Sebastian was busy buttoning his shirt, his movements quick and efficient, like he was preparing for a battle or a retreat. How long? I demanded again. 2 years, Chloe whispered. 2 years. Before Sebastian proposed. Before he told me he loved me. Before I started planning the future I thought we would share. Since before we were engaged. My voice was very quiet now, deadly serious. Sebastian's hands stilled on the buttons of his shirt. Isla, since before you told me you loved me. Since before you proposed. Since I introduced you to Chloe at that dinner party. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with nauseating clarity. I hadn't introduced them. They already knew each other. Chloe's surprise when I brought Sebastian home was an act. Their chemistry, which I had attributed to them both being important people to me, was real, but for all the wrong reasons. You planned this from the beginning. This wasn't a question. You researched me, found out about my inheritance. And then what? You made sure I'd meet you at that charity gala. You made sure I'd fall for you. Sebastian's silence was a confession. And you, I turned back to Chloe, you helped him. You pretended to be my friend. You fed him all my insecurities. You told him exactly how to make me fall in love with him. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they seemed born more of frustration than actual remorse. You have to understand, Isla. Sebastian and I have a history. We were together first. That is not an excuse. I screamed. That is not a reason to destroy someone's life. If you wanted to be together, you should have stayed together. You shouldn't have dragged me into it. We needed the money, Sebastian said flatly, finally dropping all pretense of love or regret. Chloe's family cut her off, and my business is failing. Your grandmother's trust fund was the solution to our problems. The callousness of his words, the way he spoke of my life and my love as a mere financial transaction, was almost more devastating than the infidelity itself. Get out. My voice was very quiet, very calm. Isla, get out of this house. Both of you. Now. This is my house, Sebastian said, and there was a dangerous edge to his tone that made me take a step back. Actually, a voice said from the doorway, it's mine. We all turned to see Eleanor standing in the entrance to her suite. Her dark hair was perfectly coiffed despite the late hour, and her expression was colder than a winter frost. She was fully dressed in an elegant black outfit that made her look like she was going to a funeral, which, I supposed, she was. Mom, Sebastian began, but Eleanor held up a perfectly manicured hand. I've heard enough, she said, her voice making each word sound like a blade cutting through silk. More than enough. You knew, I whispered, looking at the woman who had welcomed me into her family just hours before, who had smiled and toasted and acted as if she were gaining a beloved daughter-in-law. Eleanor's dark eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected. Regret. I suspected, she said quietly. But I hoped I was wrong. I hoped my son had more honor. Mom, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Eleanor's voice could have frozen fire. You married this beautiful, trusting girl for her money while carrying on an affair with her friend. You planned to rob her and abandon her. You have shamed our family name and broken every vow you made before God. Sebastian's face cycled through several expressions: surprise, anger, calculation before he settled on defensive indignation. She'd never have missed the money. She has more than she knows what to do with. That is not the point. Eleanor's composure cracked for a moment, revealing the fury beneath. The point is that you are a thief, a liar, and a disgrace to everything this family has ever stood for. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. I am so sorry, child, more than you can possibly know. This house is mine, and I want you to know you are welcome here. She looked back at Sebastian and Chloe with undisguised contempt. They are not. What do you mean, it's yours? Sebastian demanded. Eleanor smiled, and it was like watching a wolf bare its teeth. Did you really think I would leave our ancestral home to a son who would sell it off to pay his gambling debts? The house, the land, everything is still in my name. You have no claim here. The implication of that hit Sebastian like a physical blow. Not only had his plan to steal my money failed, but he was also losing the home head counted on inheriting. You can't do that, he said. I already have. Eleanor pulled a folded document from her purse. I changed my will. You get nothing. Not the house, not the investments, not the family business, nothing. But I'm your son. You were my son. Now you are just a stranger who shares my DNA. The finality in her voice, the complete severing of the family bond, seemed to shake Sebastian more than anything that had happened so far. He stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. Chloe, Eleanor continued, turning her attention to my former best friend. I suggest you gather your things and leave now, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Chloe scrambled out of bed, clutching the sheet. Her face was a mess of tears and mascara. Your clothes are in the guest room where you left them when you came here to seduce my son, Eleanor said with icy precision. You have 5 minutes. As Chloe scurried from the room, Eleanor turned back to Sebastian. You have until dawn to remove yourself and your belongings from this property. After that, you will be considered an intruder. Where am I supposed to go? The whining note in his voice might have moved me once. Now it just sounded pathetic. That is not my problem, Eleanor replied. You should have thought of that before you decided to ruin your life for money. Sebastian looked at me then, and for a second, I saw something in his eyes that might have been actual remorse. Isla, I held up a hand, surprised at how steady my own voice was. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it didn't mean anything. Don't say you love me. We both know that would just be another lie. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it. What could he possibly say? What words could bridge the chasm of betrayal that now stretched between us? I trusted you, I said quietly. I gave you everything I had. My heart, my body, my future, my money. I would have done anything for you, and you threw it all away. For what? For a trust fund we could have shared if you had just been honest. For a woman who helped you deceive me. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said, echoing Chloe's earlier words. I nodded. It was supposed to happen in secret, and I was never supposed to find out, living my whole life as your foolish wife while you and Chloe laughed behind my back. Is that right? The cruelty of their original plan seemed to hit him for the first time. His face flinched, as if he finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered. But you did. And the worst part is, you would have kept hurting me forever if I hadn't found out. Eleanor had watched this exchange like a hawk watching its prey, and now she stepped closer. Isla, my dear, would you like me to call someone for you? Your parents? A friend? The thought of explaining this to my parents, of seeing the pity and horror in their eyes, made my stomach clench. And friends Chloe had been my closest. The rest were acquaintances at best, people who would be more interested in the scandal than in comforting me. No, I said quietly. Thank you, but I just need to think. Eleanor nodded in understanding. You can stay here as long as you need. This house has seen its share of heartbreak. Perhaps it can offer you some peace. I looked around the room that had been the stage for the demolition of my world, the rumpled bed, the flickering candles, the scattered clothes, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest where my heart used to be. I should go, Sebastian said, but he didn't move toward the door. Yes, I nodded. You should. But he still lingered, as if waiting for forgiveness, or understanding, or some sign that this could be fixed. Isla, what we had, was a lie, I finished, the words coming out flat, final. All of it. Every kiss, every I love you, every promise. It was all part of your plan. Not all of it, he protested. Something was real. My feelings for you were convenient. I finished for him. Useful, but not real. If they were real, you wouldn't have been able to do this. He flinched as if I'd slapped him, but I felt no satisfaction in causing him pain. I felt nothing at all but a vast, echoing emptiness where my future used to be. Go, Sebastian. Take Chloe and go live your life with the woman you actually want, and leave me to figure out how to rebuild mine. This time he moved toward the door, but he paused in the threshold. If it means anything, he said, not turning around, I really did care about you. I didn't answer. No, you didn't, I said. My voice was sure and steady. If you had, none of this would have happened. The sound of his footsteps fading down the hall was like a door closing on everything I had thought my life would be. Within minutes, I heard movement throughout the house drawers opening and closing, muffled voices, the sounds of hasty packing. Eleanor stayed with me the whole time, her presence solid and comforting but unobtrusive. When the main doors slammed shut and a car engine started in the driveway, she went to the window and watched until the taillights disappeared into the night. They're gone, she said quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. What will you do now, Isla? It was a good question. What does one do when their entire life implodes in a single night? When everything you believed about love and trust and the future turns out to be a carefully constructed lie? I don't know, I admitted. Eleanor came to my side, her hand resting gently on my arm. You will survive this, she said with quiet certainty. You are stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. I feel like an idiot. The two are not mutually exclusive, Eleanor replied. Sometimes, being a fool is what allows us to love completely. The fault does not lie in your capacity to trust, but in his capacity to betray. We were silent for a moment, surrounded by the evidence of my ruined dreams. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. There is one more thing you should know, she said carefully. I looked at her, unsure if I could bear any more revelations. The wedding guests, our family, your family, our friends, they're all staying at the hotel downtown. In the morning, they will be expecting to see you both off on your honeymoon. They'll want to congratulate you, to wish you well. The thought of facing all those people, of having to explain what happened, or trying to pretend everything was fine, made my chest tighten with panic. I can't, I whispered. I can't face them. I can't tell them. Then don't, Eleanor said. I just stared at her, confused. What do you mean? A slow smile spread across her face, one so sharp it could cut glass. I mean, Sebastian and Chloe made their choices. They chose deceit and betrayal and greed. Perhaps it's time they faced the consequences of those choices. I don't understand. Eleanor turned to face me fully, her dark eyes glittering with what might have been mischief or vengeance. My dear girl, you've been playing defense all night. It's time to go on the offensive. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the hotel's grand ballroom as our wedding guests gathered for what they thought was a farewell breakfast before Sebastian and I departed for our honeymoon. I stood at the back of the room, watching the familiar faces chat over coffee and croissants, utterly oblivious that their picture-perfect wedding was about to devolve into something else entirely. I had barely slept, spending the remaining hours of my wedding night planning what Eleanor had called the moment of truth. She had been surprisingly helpful, providing details about Sebastian's financial situation I hadn't known, contacts who could help me secure my assets, and most importantly, the courage to seize control of my own narrative instead of letting them write it for me. My parents sat at a table near the front, their faces glowing with pride and happiness in a way that made my chest ache. Sebastian's relatives filled several tables, their expressions expectant as they awaited the happy couple's appearance. Chloe's family was there too, her parents basking in the reflected glory of their daughter's best friend's perfect wedding. They had no idea what was coming. Sebastian arrived first, looking trim and composed in his travel clothes. His practiced, winning smile moved through the room like a seasoned actor's, accepting congratulations and well wishes with the kind of charm that had once captivated me. Watching him now, knowing what I knew, I could see the performance for what it was: calculated, hollow, designed to extract maximum advantage from every interaction. Chloe appeared a moment later, radiant in a blue sundress that perfectly matched her eyes. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed she'd gotten away with the perfect crime, hugging my relatives, laughing with old college friends, playing the part of the devoted best friend to perfection. Neither of them had seen me yet, as I was standing behind an ornate pillar near the entrance. I wanted to watch them first, to see them play out this farce before I brought their house of cards crashing down. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sebastian called out, tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to my husband as he prepared to address our guests. "Thank you all for coming this morning. Isla and I are so grateful you could be with us for our wedding yesterday, and we wanted to share a few words before we head off to Italy." The crowd murmured its approval, faces turned expectantly toward Sebastian. He was in his element, commanding the room with practiced ease. "Yesterday was the most beautiful day of my life," he continued, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine emotion. "To marry the woman of my dreams, surrounded by everyone we love, there is no greater joy." A few people sighed appreciatively. My mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, still emotional from the previous day's events. "Isla and I feel incredibly blessed," Sebastian went on, "and we want you all to know how much your support means to us as we begin this new chapter of our lives together." It was a beautiful speech, delivered with perfect sincerity. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been moved myself. Instead, I felt sickened, watching him manipulate these good people who genuinely cared for us. "Where is the blushing bride?" my Uncle Robert called out, looking around the room with a good-natured smile. Sebastian's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, so brief most people probably missed it, but I saw it. That flicker of uncertainty as he realized he didn't actually know where I was or what I might be planning. "Just touching up her makeup," he said smoothly. "You know how women are. Always want to look their best." The comment drew a few chuckles, but I noticed Chloe's face tighten slightly. She was scanning the room now, and when her eyes found me behind the pillar, her face went white. She said something to Sebastian, too low for me to hear, and I saw his body language change instantly. His shoulders tensed, his smile became fixed, and his eyes began searching the crowd with barely concealed panic. It was time. I stepped out from behind the pillar, moving through the crowd with measured steps. The chatter died down as people noticed my approach, their faces lighting up with warmth and curiosity. I was wearing a simple black dress, deliberately chosen for its funereal connotations, and my wedding ring was pointedly absent from my finger. I had left it on Eleanor's nightstand with a note thanking her for her kindness and a promise to be in touch. "Isla," my mother called, rising from her chair with her arms outstretched. "There's our beautiful bride." I kissed her on the cheek, accepting her hug while keeping my eyes fixed on Sebastian. His face had gone ashen, and I could see the gears turning as he tried to figure out what I could possibly be planning to say. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "Thank you all for coming this morning, and thank you for yesterday's celebration. It was truly revealing." Sebastian's eyes widened slightly at my choice of words, but he held his ground. "I have something I'd like to share with you all," I continued, moving to stand beside Sebastian at the head of the room. "Something important about my marriage." "Isla," Sebastian muttered under his breath, "what are you doing?" I ignored him, focusing on the sea of expectant faces before me. "Yesterday, I thought I was marrying the man of my dreams," I began, my voice steady despite the emotional tempest raging inside me. "I thought I was embarking on the greatest adventure of my life with someone who loved me as much as I loved him." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A few people smiled, clearly expecting a heartfelt declaration of love. But last night, I discovered something that changed everything. The energy in the room shifted. Smiles faded as people picked up on the darker note in my tone. "Isla, please," Sebastian said, his voice urgent but low enough that only those closest could hear. "Don't do this. We can work this out." I turned to face him squarely, and in that moment, I let every ounce of my pain and betrayal show on my face. "Can we, Sebastian? Can we work out the fact that you spent our wedding night in bed with my best friend?" The silence that followed was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop. Then came the whispers, the sharp intakes of breath, the gasps of disbelief, the sound of chairs shifting as people turned to get a better view of the unfolding drama. Sebastian's face cycled through denial, anger, calculation, before settling on desperate damage control. You don't understand what you saw. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice cutting through his protest like a razor. I understand that this entire relationship was a lie, designed to give you access to my inheritance. I understand that you and Chloe have been planning this betrayal for 2 years. I understand that my wedding was nothing more than a business transaction to you. The room erupted. My father was on his feet, his face dark with fury, held back only by my uncles. Chloe's mother began to cry, covering her face with her hands in shame. Sebastian's relatives were shouting questions and accusations, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and rage. Through it all, Sebastian stood frozen, his carefully constructed facade finally crumbling under the weight of public exposure. "Chloe!" I called out, turning to my former best friend. She was pressed against the wall by the buffet table, her face the color of milk, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse like a life raft. "Do you want to tell everyone how long you and Sebastian have been sleeping together? Or should I?" "Isla, please," Chloe whispered, but her voice was audible in the horrifying silence. 2 years, I announced to the room. They have been having an affair for 2 years, planning this elaborate con to steal my grandmother's trust fund. A fund that I foolishly signed over into Sebastian's control just last week. The reaction was immediate and explosive. "You want to know the most pathetic part of all this?" I continued, my voice somehow remaining steady despite the chaos around me. "I would have given you anything you asked for. If you had been honest, if you had told me you needed the money, I would have helped you. But instead, you chose to destroy me for it." "Isla," Sebastian tried one last time, reaching for my arm. I recoiled, shying from his touch as if it were poison. "No, don't touch me. Don't speak to me. Don't you ever come near me again." I turned to address the room one last time. "I want you all to know that I am okay. I am hurt, of course, but I am okay. And I want you to know that this betrayal says nothing about love or marriage or trust in general. It only says something about the character of people who would choose deceit over honesty." I looked directly at Chloe, who was now openly sobbing. "I trusted you with my heart, and you sold it for money. I hope it was worth it." Finally, I turned back to Sebastian, the man who, just 24 hours ago, had been my entire world. "You can have each other," I said quietly. "You deserve each other." And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind me and stepping into whatever came next. The following months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, asset recovery, and emotional rebuilding. Sebastian had indeed transferred a significant portion of my trust fund to accounts he controlled, but Eleanor's lawyers were relentless in their pursuit of the funds. Within weeks, every cent was returned, along with hefty penalties that drove Sebastian's already failing business into ruin. Chloe's family, horrified by their daughter's behavior, disowned her completely. Sebastian's relatives did the same, excommunicating him from the family business and the social circle that had been his primary source of income and status. I moved back to my apartment in the city, throwing myself into work and therapy with equal determination. The betrayal had shattered my ability to trust, but it had also revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. I had survived the worst thing I could imagine, and I was still standing. But karma, it turned out, was just getting started. 6 months after that devastating morning in the hotel ballroom, I received a call from an unknown number. "Isla, it's Mark, Sebastian's uncle." I hadn't spoken to anyone from Sebastian's family since the wedding disaster, so the call was unexpected. "Hi, Mark. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you. I'm calling because, well, I thought you should know what's happening with Sebastian and Chloe." Against my better judgment, I felt a prickle of curiosity. I had purposely avoided all news of them, wanting to focus on my own healing rather than reveling in their downfall. "I'm not sure I want to know," I said honestly. "I think you do," Mark replied. "They're destroying each other, Isla. It's quite spectacular, really." I listened as Mark recounted the chaos Sebastian and Chloe's relationship had become. Apparently, without my trust fund to cushion their fall, the stress of their drastically reduced circumstances had begun to eat away at their bond like acid. Sebastian blamed Chloe for encouraging him to go through with the marriage scheme, while Chloe blamed Sebastian for getting caught. They were living together out of necessity, not love, and the small apartment they could afford was a far cry from the luxury they had planned to enjoy. Sebastian is drinking heavily, Mark continued. He lost what was left of his business and can barely hold down a regular job now. Chloe is working at a department store, and from what I hear, she hates every minute of it. How sad, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Not because I felt sorry for them, but because the ruin of their lives felt more empty than satisfying. There's more, Mark said. They fight constantly. The neighbors have called the police twice for domestic disturbances. Chloe tried to leave him last month, but she has nowhere to go. Her family won't take her back, and she burned every other bridge when this all came out. The picture Mark painted was of two people trapped in a prison of their own making, their betrayal having poisoned not just their victim, but themselves as well. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Mark was quiet for a moment. "Because I want you to know that justice was served, even if it didn't come from a courtroom. They tried to build their happiness on the ruin of yours, and it turns out that that's not a very stable foundation." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time, processing what I'd learned. A part of me felt vindicated. They were getting exactly what they deserved. But a larger part of me felt hollow, as if their misery diminished rather than validated my own healing. I realized then that true healing meant letting go of the need for their punishment to define my peace. Their consequences were theirs, just as my recovery was mine. A year later, I met Ethan. He was nothing like Sebastian. Where Sebastian was smooth and charming, Ethan was genuine and steady. Where Sebastian was focused on what I could give him, Ethan was interested in who I was. He knew my story from the beginning. He knew about the betrayal and the trust issues it had created, and he was patient with my process in a way that slowly, surely, rebuilt my faith in the possibility of sincere love. Our relationship grew slowly, carefully, with a transparency that would have been impossible before my experience with Sebastian. Ethan's patience and consistency gradually convinced me that not all men were predators, not all charm was manipulation, and not all love was conditional. 2 years after my disastrous first wedding, Ethan proposed to me on a beach, the very same one where Sebastian had once made promises he never intended to keep. But where Sebastian's proposal had been a performance designed to manipulate my emotions, Ethan's was simple, heartfelt, and entirely focused on our authentic connection. I said yes. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended only by the people who truly loved and supported us. Eleanor was there. She had become an unexpected friend and mentor in the wake of her son's betrayal. My parents, who had struggled to trust my judgment after being so completely duped by Sebastian, had slowly learned to love Ethan for his genuine character. It was during the reception, as I was dancing with my new husband, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my happiness, that I saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the garden. He looked terrible thin, unshaven, his clothes rumpled and stained. He stood just outside the fence like a ghost from my past, his eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't read. "Excuse me for a moment," I whispered to Ethan, kissing his cheek. "I'll be right back." Ethan followed my gaze and saw Sebastian instantly. His jaw tightened, but he just nodded. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No," I said, surprised at how calm I felt. "I need to handle this myself." I walked across the garden towards Sebastian, aware that a few guests had noticed his presence and were watching with concern. When I reached the fence, I stopped just out of his reach and waited for him to speak. Up close, he looked even worse. His eyes were bloodshot, his complexion sallow, and he smelled like he hadn't showered in days. "Isla," he said, his voice raspy and broken. "Sebastian," I kept my tone neutral, matter-of-fact. "You look beautiful. Happy." "I am." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of my wedding celebration floating on the air behind me, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses raised in genuine joy. "I came to apologize," he said finally. "I know it doesn't matter anymore. I know it's too late. But I had to tell you I'm sorry. For everything." I studied his face, looking for the manipulation, the calculation that was always there, but now all I saw was broken desperation. "What happened to Chloe?" I asked. Sebastian face twisted. "She left me 6 months ago. Said she couldn't stand to look at me anymore. Couldn't stand what we'd become. And now you're alone." "Completely," he laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "New money, new job, new family, new friends. No one who ever cared about me will speak to me. Consequences," I said simply. I know I deserve it. But Isla, you have to know. What I felt for you, it was real. Maybe it started as part of the plan, but somewhere along the way, it became real. I looked at this broken man who had once been my entire world, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not satisfaction. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness where all that pain used to live. "It doesn't matter," I said quietly. "What?" "Whether it was real or not. It doesn't matter anymore." Sebastian's face cycled through confusion, hope, despair. "I forgive you," I continued, and realized as I said the words that they were true. "Not for you. For me, I forgive you because holding on to that anger was poisoning my ability to be happy." "Does that mean?" "It doesn't mean anything. Except that I've made my peace with what happened. It means I hope you find a way to build a better life for yourself. But it doesn't mean I want you in mine." Sebastian stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the finality in my words. "You're really happy," he said, and there was wonder in his voice, as if he was astonished such a thing was possible after what he had done to me. "Yes, I am. With myself," I corrected. "Ethan is wonderful, but my happiness isn't dependent on him the way it once was on you. I've learned to be whole on my own." That seemed to hit Sebastian harder than anything he'd said. His face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might cry. "I ruined everything," he whispered. "You ruined what we had. But you didn't round me. You couldn't." I took a step back from the fence, preparing to return to my real life, my real wedding, my real happiness. "Goodbye, Sebastian." "Isla, wait." I turned, and in that moment, I saw him clearly. Perhaps for the first time, not as the charming man who had won me over, not as the villain who had betrayed me, but as a deeply flawed human being who had made terrible choices and was living with the consequences. "I can't give you what you're looking for," I said gently. "I can't absolve you, or take away your guilt, or make your life better. You have to do that yourself. I don't know how. The same way I did. One day at a time. With help. With honesty. With the decision to be better than you were." I started to walk away again, then paused. "Sebastian?" "Yes?" "Don't ever show up at my wedding again. Don't come to my home. Don't contact me, or Ethan, or anyone in my family. If you want to make amends, do it by living a life that's worth something. Do it by making sure you never hurt anyone again the way you hurt me. And if I do, if I get better?" I looked at him one last time. This man who had taught me that I was stronger than I knew, more resilient than I imagined, more capable of love than I had dared to hope. "Then maybe one day you'll forgive yourself," I said. "But that's between you and you. It has nothing to do with me." I walked back to my wedding, back to Ethan, back to the life I had built from the ashes of my dreams. I didn't look back to see if Sebastian was still standing by the fence, because it didn't matter. His story was his to write now, just as mine was my own. Ethan met me halfway across the garden, his eyes searching my face for any sign of distress. "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. He pulled me into his arms, and we danced under the stars as our friends and family celebrated around us. The past was the past. The future stretched before us, bright and boundless. And in that moment, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Sebastian never contacted me again. Years later, Eleanor mentioned in passing that she'd heard he was working as a counselor at a rehab clinic, helping others rebuild their lives after hitting rock bottom. Whether it was true or not, whether he had found redemption or was still lost in the fallout of his choices, I never found out. And I realized, with a profound sense of satisfaction, that I didn't need to know.